Hello and welcome to Consciously Awesome Living here on Soulivity TV. I'm your host, Sheila Applegate, spiritual seer, healer, and conscious life coach, helping you to manifest the life that you deserve and desire. So, we're always talking about different topics that help us become more conscious of what we're doing so that we can choose. And the more conscious and aligned that we are with all the aspects of our life, the easier it is to draw to us those things that we desire right in the core of our being. So, today we're talking about traditions. And traditions are an interesting part of our life. And sometimes we don't take the time to really look at them and explore them and see what they mean to us. So there's two different definitions of tradition. One is the idea that we're passing down through the generations some behaviors or thought patterns, some things that we do the same from generation to generation. That can make us feel connected to each other at times. And that one, I think, is always evolving. That definition of tradition, I think, naturally evolves. I was thinking about this recently with my children who are now young adults, and having had both of my parents die recently and still going through some of those things, I'm evaluating what's important to me, what brings back those memories, those connections that were traditions in my childhood, and then realizing that my children have their own set of things. Some things we did consciously, like we as a family started going for a hike every Easter to look for signs of spring, with that idea of renewal and the metaphysical aspect of the resurrection. So that's a conscious thing. And now, even when we're not together across the country, my kids will send pictures of hiking on Easter morning and we'll send them to them as well. So that's a new tradition that is evolving. When I was a child, we went to church. My dad got us a corsage. We had a big family gathering with all the cousins, and it was a pretty formal type of a holiday. Both are important and good and work for the generation as it evolves. Of course, we still do Easter eggs, although my kids thought it would be fun to start now doing, I think, Thanksgiving eggs or something, because one year we didn't use up the package. And so they thought, well, this is fun. They always like to push those boundaries. But really, that's a little bit about what we're talking on today, because when we allow traditions to evolve, we're passing down that aspect of our good memories. What does a tradition like this in a family really mean? It's usually something around times that were special for us. So our desire to repeat them is to get that feeling of connection, maybe a spiritual connection as well as a love family type of experience, something that we were bonded with in our family growing up. And that should evolve with each generation, just as each generation is moving and growing, and we're becoming more conscious with every generation of the human experience. Now, there's another definition of tradition, and that includes usually religious doctrine, but it's a belief system or a rule that's not actually in the religious scripture, whatever that religion is, but it is a belief that gets passed down. Sometimes it might be referred to in a scripture or a holy book. When we look at those, now those could be eating kosher, being home before sunrise. It could, it has to do with often what seems like a tradition that it sometimes is presented as if we need to do this because it's ordained by the higher power. But if you go back in history, you'll realize that a lot of these types of traditions also were ways of helping people to become healthy at the time, at a time when, say, pork was not clean and there was some disease and they didn't know why, but they knew that people who were eating pork were getting sick. So now they interpreted that as don't eat this because God is punishing. Sometimes that's the interpretation, those who do. There's the eating fish on Friday, now just in Lent, but at the time there was a shortage of meat and there was a ample amount of fish. So as a way of helping society to live and eat the way that the area needed, right? Like the what was there, and to help actually probably the economics and the business of things, there became a rule to eat fish on Friday, and now people continue to do that. So sometimes we pass on a tradition without realizing why we are passing it down. This may or may not be that important because a lot of people are moving away from some of those smaller um, traditions because they don't make sense to them anymore. But what I found is when people reach more serious times in life, usually ceremonial, often at death, and say a wedding, those are two times where I see that people will often maybe put the traditions, the belief systems above their immediate consciousness and above the empathy or the interaction for people, for the other people in your life. I think this happened a lot during COVID, during the pandemic. I think it brought a lot of this up to the surface because we couldn't do it the old way, the way that we just did it. And it gave opportunity to explore that, but also it also sometimes brought up in us those conflicts because what I noticed a lot, especially around the grieving process or the burial, that fear is sometimes replacing the initial intention of the tradition. So, someone who might be very evolved in their understanding, very loving and caring, trusting in spirit, connected to spirit, understanding that the soul immediately is returning to the vibration of oneness, and it isn't something that you earn, but rather just our natural state of being, and that we're all loved by the divine source. But when a loved one dies, there may be an attachment to old traditions or fears that if you don't follow the specific rituals, that will harm the person or the soul from making it to the source. So I really had an opportunity to observe and notice when we can attach to something that hurts and forget to remember the purpose of it. Again, in some of the burial rituals, it was probably a healthy way of doing things at the time. And when COVID came, there was a different, healthier way of doing things at the time, and we're perfectly evolving. But sometimes when we're in that state of grief or intensity, sometimes with the joyousness of a wedding, as I said, this feeling of connection to the ways it were, the ways the way it was, the ways that were passed down to us is so intense that we forget the purpose of it. And if we push that, onto ourselves or onto another, we can also cause pain and harm that is not our intention. When our intention is actually the support and love that those beliefs originated with, then it is important to get ourselves to a space where we can return to that understanding. So I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper in just a minute, and we'll explore your own beliefs and maybe your traditions, how you would like to evolve them. We'll be right back.
6 years ago, when I started Soulivity, my vision was to support everyone in improving their life through the discovery of their passion and purpose, so they could become the best version of themselves, to battle fear and ignorance, and create a better world today. Get inspired to live your passion and purpose. Visit Soulivity.com now.
All right, welcome back. So we're talking about traditions, and we've moved into sort of when we get into deep emotional times in our life and maybe have that conflict of, do we need to follow it the old way, even if something in front of us is telling us it needs to be the new way, or the next generation is wanting to evolve, having different ideas of it, and understanding who is important to pay attention to at that moment, because it is important to pay attention to ourselves, but we also want to be aware of those who we love who are around us during this time. So we talked about how this sometimes comes up when we're in deep grief, and maybe the fear that if we don't follow specific traditions, then we won't, the person we care for won't make it to heaven, or they'll be mad at me. That's something that I get a lot when people are wanting a reading to connect with a loved one, but they're afraid that that person will be mad at them for not upholding some of the traditions or whatever choices they made during that time, which always makes me very sad, because of course your loved one is not mad at you, even if they've crossed over, especially if they've crossed over. Love is truly what is left when this body is finished. So, um, I remember when my mom was several years ago, my mom couldn't find the file that she had planned out her funeral in. She had given us like what she wanted her funeral to be, which is nice. And my kids are like, "Can you do that for us, Mom, in case we want to in case we're confused at that time?" So I said, "Sure, but you get to do whatever you want." Because what I said to my mom at that point is, it doesn't matter that you lost it, because the funeral's not for you. You're going to be dead. You're going to be fine. The funeral's for us and how we need to process it. And then she just smiled and hugged me because she gets that. And of course, we wanted to honor her, but she died during COVID. And so there's no way we could have done what she was thinking she wanted us to do back then. And of course, by then she was with us in spirit. So we were able to connect with her and plan that in a way that was perfect for the moment. I've also seen this with weddings, as I mentioned, because if you think about weddings, I officiate weddings for people sometimes, and there's always a discussion about what parts of the wedding are we going to include. And sometimes the couple will say, well, we don't want anything about obeying, because if you look at a traditional, and I'm talking Christian wedding, I guess, because that's what I know, as far as going through the whole process of it. But if you look at a traditional wedding, I would say Christian or non-religious, it is actually symbolically about selling the bride to the man, to the family. And there's not just the obeying in that, where many people have changed those vows, but much of the symbolism is also about that. And so often, then as we evolve, the generation beneath, coming up is saying, hey, let's not do this part, let's not do this part. And so it's moving into a different way of being. And sometimes the older generations are not sure about that. But then when they experience the love of the wedding and the joy and the synergy of it all, they're always just delighted with it after, in my experience. So that's another time where we might be challenged of what is the symbolism that is happening here. The father of the bride walking her down the aisle and then shaking the groom's hand and then joining their hands together literally was the deal, right? But sometimes it means something different to the father now. So maybe even if the bride and the groom are like, no, we aren't having, this isn't a deal, we're doing this together. Maybe it means something to the father of the bride because he's been thinking about that. And it means something different to him. And there was one situation where I saw that, and the bride was like, okay, let's do that, because it meant something to her dad. And she was able to shift the meaning of it for herself. And when they joined hands, when the couple actually joined hands in that process, there was no energy or sense of that old tradition in that negative way in it. It was pure love. So we can draw on traditions, but we often should understand why we are doing it. That's what I wanted to talk about mostly today, because we can change the meaning of it. But first, we should pay attention to what was the meaning and what does it mean for us, and what does it mean for the people around us, and what are our priorities, so that we can consciously have that feeling of love and connection that passes through the generations. Pay attention to the current health and economic needs of our world around us, knowing that they change and they evolve. I suppose if the Bible was created now, it might be vegan, because we have different understandings and we're evolving as a human race at the same time. So it's important to always let these traditions to move and evolve, and to understand that we may have a tradition that means something to us that doesn't mean the same to the generation behind us or in front of us. It also may not mean the same to our partner or the people around us. So when we take a moment to go deep within ourselves and say, what is this meaning? What is it that I want in this? And what is the other person wanting? And is it similar? Then we can come to a agreement that will be supportive of the essence of what we want to pass on or reconnect with. So there's a few steps that I recommend you incorporate into your life. You can do this now, just, as we're talking, or sometime in the next few days, just get out a piece of paper and kind of go through these steps. But you also can do it when you notice something coming to the surface. You notice that you're now in a situation. Maybe it's a holiday, um, or a ceremony, or a time that is usually making you think of your past and feeling that longing for your family of origin and those memories of your childhood and wanting to pass that on. Um, those might be times where this comes up. So, the first thing that I recommend is to just pay attention and notice, when are you behaving in a way that has to do with a tradition, a rule, maybe a way of doing things. One of the ways you might find it is, why do we do this? We just because we always have, right? That if you're saying that, or if this is the way our religion does it, this is the way our people does it, this is the way our family does it. If that thinking is coming up, it's probably time just to pay attention. It doesn't mean you're going to throw it out, it just means pay attention to, okay, this is a good time for me to re-examine. I'm always talking to you about upgrading our beliefs. So this is just a new form of that. It's just sort of a new angle of understanding that in a more specific way. So when you go through this, what traditions did you have in your childhood? What did you do on holidays? What things were taught to you that were important? Were there certain rules that had to do with religion that you embodied or rebelled against? And were there certain things that happened on holidays? Were there certain things that always went this way? And as you're reflecting on that, just try to write them all down. And then we'll go through them one by one. So again, if you're doing this as a intensive, write them all down. If one comes up, just write that down and go through the process with that one. So once you kind of explore what your traditions are, then the next step is, we'll just take one for the moment. Just take the one and really ask yourself some questions. I want you to ask yourself, where did this originate? Now, you may need to go back and talk to your parents if it's available for you to do that, or other family members if it's a tradition that's been specific to your family. If it's a religious tradition, you may want to explore and learn, not just from the scripture, but also learn about the time and the analysis of where certain rules may have come in. And we're not judging at this time, we're just examining, just learning, because you can't make an informed decision if you don't know the facts, right? So you're just learning about it at this point. Then next is not about facts. It's all about emotions. How does this make you feel? When you think of this tradition, do you feel warm in your heart? Is it bringing back memories of your childhood? Is it bringing stress into your life? Are you feeling fear that if you deviate from this, that something bad would happen? Are you feeling that you must pass it on because it's your obligation? Or are you feeling like, oh, I want my children or grandchildren or the next generation of people in my life to experience this feeling that I had of love and connectedness? Now, if if it's in one of those fear-based, if you realize it's fear-based or just not knowing, like, that you can change it, then we're going to go down kind of one side of this. If it's fear-based, then explore that belief system using the idea of, what is my belief around it? How does it serve me? Is there another way that will serve me better? So think about that. And sometimes it's really just thinking about, do I really believe that, right? In my everyday life, am I afraid of this? Or am I only afraid that we might get it wrong and bad things might happen in certain situations? And if it's only in certain situations, maybe apply the way that you think to others. Is it hurting somebody? If it's hurting somebody, then you want to really look at, okay, what is more important to me? And now we're probably in that spot. If it's fear, we want to overcome the fear. If it's love, if it's good feelings, if it's something that was beautiful for us and we want others to experience that, beauty, that sacredness, whatever feelings that we had, that's what we want to pass on is the tradition, right? You want to pass on that energy around it, perhaps sacredness, perhaps love, community, family, those feelings. And if it's not matching them to continue this specific behavior, if they're not going to feel that, then how can we shift that so that we can create something that will make them feel that way? And then move into looking at what will we do differently and how do we feel that? And then you create new traditions around that. Now, if you are the younger generation and your older generation is here and you're wanting to move on because it doesn't feel the same for you, maybe you just don't feel anything, maybe it feels silly to you now. Maybe you know that it had to do with something very practical that no longer exists, and yet your loved one is feeling like, no, it just has to be this way. You may want to talk to them about what does it feel to them. If it's fear, you may or may not want to challenge that for them. You offer them other possibilities, but if it's theirs, it's theirs. And now you get to look at yourself and can my love for them allow me to do this out of compassion because it's not hurting me? Can I look at this a different way? And how can I look at this so that I can maybe go to church on Easter Sunday with my parents because it means something to them, even though it doesn't? That's just an example. But how can I bring this into my life in a way that feels good and right to me? And then maybe I do or do not pass that on to the next generation, but maybe I'm infusing a new tradition into the next generation while still realizing that it is possible for me to honor the old tradition sometimes for the people I love. So those are just ways to sort of break it down and explore it. And it's not going to be a one-time thing. These things are ingrained in us. They can come up on, anything, even recipes. So just pay attention, because the more conscious you are, the more aware you are, the better you can make decisions that are aligned with you and aligned in love. And when you do that, that's what you're passing on. You're passing on that love, the compassion, the community, the connectedness, all of those things that people are usually wanting to pass on when they pass a tradition on. So those are my thoughts on tradition for today. I would love to hear from you. You can write a comment here in the video and just tell me about some of your traditions. If you go through the process, I'd love to hear about how you do that. And if you have questions about going through the process, be sure to write them in the comments because I always check. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next week.